Hello everyone and welcome to another ASP.NET application development video. This is episode number 16 with your host, Nelson LeKay. Hey Nelson.
Hi.
And joining us we also have Mr. Zach Parrish.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's going pretty good. And myself, Jason Busby. Now continuing on with the project management system, Nelson, what do you have planned in this ASP.NET application video?
Well, we're pretty much at the point where we can start writing markup and start stubbing out some actual code. Or not stubbing out, actually write some code. But at the moment, we've pretty much neglected the console application. And I really want to get that working so that we have something to be able to interface with the application outside of the web app.
Okay.
Just for, things like automation and most importantly, to prove that our code is more or less environment agnostic, I guess you could say. So yeah, I guess the first step is to identify what exactly we need in order to work with the code inside of our console application. And the first thing would be references to our other projects. So I'm going to go ahead and add a reference to we'll need base, domain, and query model and services. We will not need web because web, if you remember, is just the web application code for the application.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things that we need to reference. And now at this point, what do we need to work? Well, all we really need, actually, we don't really need anything because Autofac is so unobtrusive. We could just go ahead and instantiate, a unit of work factory and a unit of work or a unit of work provider factory. We can instantiate a unit of work provider, and we can start working with the database. Right here. However, it would be a lot nicer to get Autofac up and running within the context of our console application, just so we can write the same code. But the issue with that is you'll see in our .web, this is where we're doing all of our Autofac initialization, and this is going to become redundant as we initialize Autofac for the console. So I'm going to introduce a feature of Autofac, and that's called components. And components allow you to break apart your configuration of the builder, your container builder configuration, into classes that can be reused later. So, yeah. I guess the first step would be identify what do we need to turn into a component. And I guess it would just be whatever code needs to be wired up here. So we need to wire these up to Autofac using a component. And so we're basically going to break out this code into its own component. Everything else is going to stay here because all of this other stuff is ASP.NET MVC specific, like the .NET Less compiler, the Autofac controller factory, and the Autofac dependency resolver. So I'm going to go ahead and add a class to .services, and it's going to be a component registry repository. I don't know where that came from. And we're going to make sure that we have a reference to Autofac, which we do not. So we're going to have to go ahead and add a reference. And remember, that's just in our lib folder. So Autofac, just Autofac. And we have that reference. So now we inherit from Autofac.module. Did I say component previously? I don't know why I said component. And we're going to make an overriding member, and it's going to be load. So now we're overriding the load method, and we're just basically just going to take this code right here that we want abstracted away, and we're going to dump it in here so we can reuse it wherever we need to. And I'm just hitting Control or Alt-N or adding in those usings. I'm going to indent this over, and now we have our component registry for the services. I'm going to rename this. This is a bad name. Service module. Okay, so now we have our service module. Now, how do we actually tell Autofac? Once we have an instance, let's unpin that. Once we have an instance of Autofac, how do we tell it that we want to register stuff in a component? And in that, I don't know where that comment came from. And we're just going to go builder.register module, sorry. And we're going to pass in the type of the module, which is just going to be service module. And that's really all we have to do.
Wow, that's pretty easy.
So now we can actually go ahead and launch another Autofac instance and build it and just send in register module, service module, and we'll have everything in the services already wired up to everything that we need to have wired up. In addition, you'll remember we have the honeycomb host interface, and that has the begin request and the end request methods. And that's because I kind of wanted to create a honeycomb host object that has sort of an overarching relationship to the lifetime of a request. And we're going to replicate this in our honeycomb console by creating a honeycomb host class, and he's going to implement the iHoney, because there's no capital and there's no V. And I'm just going to hit Control or Alt Enter, Alt Enter, Alt Enter repeatedly until the code I want shows up.
That's way of
That's how you write an app with ReSharper.
And then I'm going to set up Autofac from within this honeycomb host. So I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to need a private iContainer. We're basically just going to be replicating the code that goes in here in this application start. But we're going to need a whole lot less stuff because we're not dealing with HTTP. And this is going to be a single-threaded application. Even though we still have the begin and end request stuff, this still is going to be a single-threaded application. For now, I guess. So we need an iContainer. So our honeycomb host contains our Autofac iContainer class. And that brought in a system.component model class, which isn't what I wanted because I forgot to reference Autofac. So now that we've referenced Autofac in our console, iContainer will give us the option of using the Autofac iContainer, which is what we want, and we're just going to call them container. In our constructor, we're just going to say, we're going to create our container builder. And for now, all he's going to do is he's going to say component or builder register model or module service module, and then say container equals builder dot build. Our begin request is simply going to create our lifetime scope, which we also need to model up here. Our iLifetime scope, current lifetime scope. And so our current lifetime scope will equal container dot begin lifetime scope. Our end request will actually null this out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if current lifetime scope is not null, throw a new invalid operation exception. Cannot invoke begin request twice without ending the request first. And then our end request will just null that out. And now finally, read only. Now finally, our program, all he's going to do is he's going to say var host equals new honeycomb host. He's going to say host begin request and host end request. And now what goes inside here is going to essentially be, we're going to be asking the honeycomb host to give us services. And at the moment, we're either going to be asking for repositories from the query model, or we're going to be asking for services in the domain model. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply expose a method that delegates off to our lifetime scope just to test things. So he's just going to be public t service get service t service, and he's just going to be return current lifetime scope dot resolve t service. And now at this point, I could say entities equals host get service, and I can say I entity unit of work provider, and then I can say entities dot begin unit of work, and I'm just going to go ahead and say var users equal This is just for testing. Eventually, we'll have this will be in a repository service. So we're just going to query over the user DTO, and we're going to loop over that for each of our user and users console dot. Of course, horrible choice of names. Console is actually going to conflict with the console namespace in our that we're currently in. So we have to write system.console.writeLine user.username. And just for testing, that should be fine. The last thing that we're missing is an application configuration, because we need to configure and Hibernate anyway, and this is going to be a different configuration than our web app. So to go ahead and set that up, we're just going to add a new item, a new app.config, or application configuration file, which makes a new app.config, and we're going to cheat and just pull over our Hibernate code. And we obviously don't need to configure nhaml because this isn't a web app. And then we just got to hunt down our Hibernate configuration and Hibernate configuration. And that is everything but one last thing. Oh yeah, we still need to reference the MySQL.data and set the copy local to true. And we also need to reference our bytecode, linfoo proxy factory assembly, and set the copy local to true. And again, that's because Hibernate loads this class out during runtime. So it's going to look for an assembly called hibernate.bytecode.linfoo during runtime, which means it has to be in the same directory as our other objects or other assemblies. So we'll need to grab Hibernate linfoo, and then we'll also need to add MySQL.data, which doesn't return anything, of course, because it'd be too nice. MySQL.data. And we need to make sure that all this copy local is set to true. Linfoo and Hibernate MySQL. And copy local is now true. Okay, so if we run this, and I didn't make any miserable mistake other than pausing at the end, we should get some users. And this is actually going to launch the web app. So let's stop that and pretend that before I hit F5, I set a started project for the console. And now I'm going to hit F5 again, and we get nothing because we didn't create any users, I don't think. Thought we did. Maybe we didn't. We've deleted that database so many times. I'm going to actually go ahead and set a started project for the web app. Actually, no. I'm going to do what we did in the web app over here. So I'm going to say unit of work, store new user. And this is going to be the domain user, not the DTO. And his name is going to be something. And his username is going to be something. And of course the name is a value object, so I'm just going to leave it like that. And the first time we shouldn't get anything, although we do. But every subsequent time we get users. And for some reason we have a user with a blank name, and I'll go ahead and verify that's true before saying there's nothing wrong with my code. There we go. Yeah, there's a username with a blank user, or there's a person with a blank username. So yeah, so we basically just, I mean, that's how easy it is to go ahead and get started with sharing your code between two different environments. It's actually pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, are there any questions?
No, not really. I mean, it was pretty straightforward.
One of the more straightforward things we've done in this project.
So then at this point, now we're...
I mean, the first step after this would
we're
be
pretty much
get
to the point where
some
we can
basic,
actually begin on the application.
user management set up and get some basic authentication set up, which will involve actually finally writing some code.
Awesome. Well, then we'll just keep this to a short video then, and we'll just wrap up this session. Thanks, Nelson, Zach, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.